Welcome everyone to this very special occasion here on the eve of the summer solstice of 2021, June 19th. We're here in the Shanti Yoga Ashram, the School of Life, and this program tonight is sponsored by our Essene Church of Peace, which is a beautiful organization that helps us to know and understand and live a peaceful life. Tonight, our whole program this weekend is focused on Spiritism and connecting with the spirits within us and around us. And we have a great honor to welcome Father Nathan Castle and Michael Quinn.
Different kind of father.
Different kind of father, Michael Quinn, and grandfather. And they're gonna, I see there's a dog with us as well, a wonderful family member who's joined. And Michael will be interviewing Father Castle. But first, let me just give a little bit of a brief example of why we're here tonight and what we'll be hearing about. This presentation is called Afterlife Interrupted, which is also the name of some books that Father Castle has shared with the world about his work.
One of them's on the book table.
And we have a copy here in our room. Father Castle is a Catholic priest who communicates with the souls of persons who have died, who have passed on, and are having difficulty adjusting to the afterlife. He says, "I believe we are eternal. I believe the Creator who made us loves us wildly, beyond belief. My mission is to help people live in the present, to feel loved, and dwell in joyful hope. As a Catholic priest, I specialize in helping those who feel stuck, whether in this earthly life or in the afterlife, help them to experience freedom." What a beautiful work. And just to introduce Michael Quinn, who works with Father Castle as a prayer partner, and they will let us know what that means. Michael also works with spirits in the afterlife and preparing people for that transition. He's a longtime hospice volunteer, he and his wife, Linda, and they seek to awaken us to the reality that we're all beautiful, sacred souls, loved beyond measure by God, and that life is full of opportunity to share this profound love with others. His research into near-death experiences and his personal experience with spirit communication imparts a conviction that life is inherently sacred and must be lived with blessed intensity and purpose. We'll be hearing him talk tomorrow evening, and now let's begin our presentation tonight.
Thank you, Lakshmi. That was a wonderful introduction. Not sure relative to me whether it was all that truthful or not. I mean, I'm just an ordinary guy who standing on a corner waiting for a bus, and Father Nathan goes by and my life changes. So, well, actually, I'll very briefly, describe how I came to know Father Nathan. My wife and I, as Lakshmi said, wrote a book a few years ago called Assisting the Actively Dying at the Time of Transition. And it's essentially for the families of hospice patients, so that at the time of transition that they're in a position to make that transition as smooth as possible. And so I was invited to speak at the annual conference of the International Association of Near-Death Studies in September 2019 to be on a panel called Helping Souls Cross Over. And Father Nathan was on the panel to talk about his book, Afterlife Interrupted, where he does essentially what you said, Lakshmi. He assists souls who are having difficulty transitioning to transition. And I found it interesting that, I was raised a Catholic, and as a Catholic, I was taught to, you pray to God, you pray to Jesus, you pray to the saints, you pray to the Virgin Mary, you pray for your deceased loved ones, okay, for their welfare. But we were never told that they could talk back to us.
Wow.
And then here comes Father Nathan. He's in this mode where he talks to these souls. He talks to their angels. He talks to various saints that show up as part of this beautiful mission, this beautiful sacred mission he has.
And so do you now.
What's that?
So do you now for the last 2 years.
Well, yes, that's all. I mean, Father at that conference asked if I would consider being a prayer partner, and I obviously I said yes, but had no idea what I was getting into. But it just turned out to be one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. The degree of gratitude that Linda is also a prayer partner. The degree of gratitude we have is just enormous, and so I'm just essentially going to stop there and let Father, describe how he came about, to do his work, and then we'll go from there. Okay, Father?
Sure. Well, I wish I could see you all, but I know that you're there. So thank you for having me on today, and Michael for being a prayer partner and hosting this conversation or emceeing it. I was raised Catholic, and I was taught early on that I had a family on earth and a family in heaven, and that at night prayer was talking to our other family, sending blessings to people, whether they were on this plane, in the room, in the next state, or for people who had died already. We believed that they could hear us if we spoke to them. And I knew of stories of the saints who had back and forth conversation with God or Mary, appearing different places and so on. So it wasn't utterly strange to me that that there was conversation that went on across the veil, if you will. But so I was raised this little kid that already had a sense of living in more than one plane or more than one world, although there really is only one. It's a universe. And I went through my schooling and ended up choosing to go into the Catholic priesthood. I chose the Dominican order. St. Dominic is known as the Joyful Friar, and I was attracted to joy. So I've been a member of the Dominican family 42 years now, and a priest for 36 of those. Michael, you want to go into how this got started, the first of these? Is that where you want to go ahead?
You mean the first time?
For me, when I first was involved in helping somebody cross or having the first of the dreams.
Well, I do remember from your first book that there was a guardian who came to you. A guardian, Father uses the word guardian, but he uses that synonymously with angels. Okay, our guardian angels, and a guardian angel came to Father and essentially, in his dream, and Father. And the angel essentially lays the groundwork for a soul that needs assistance. I know when you talk about your first experience, you were in the clubhouse of a golf course where you were playing golf, and there was this image on a large screen of somebody who was burning up with a fire, and says, "I'll let you take it from there."
Yeah, that was the content of a dream. I was. The first time that this particular phenomenon began was about 23 years ago. I was in my early 40s. I was leading a retreat in northern Arizona, up in the mountains. I was asleep about 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and I had a dream that you began to talk about, Michael. The dream was of a young man, about 20 years old, sitting on the radiator of an old car, the kind from the late 50s, early 60s, with fins and lots of chrome. He wasn't in a car crash. He was a mechanic. He was wearing greasy clothes and somehow caught fire and was screaming and quite angry, burning on the hood of a car. I saw that the earlier part of the dream was my own dream material. Was I play golf, and I was in this dream. I was finishing a round of golf with another priest. We were going into the bar, the 19th hole, after the round of golf. This is part of the dream. Inside the clubhouse of this golf course was a silent auction going on for a charity. So this was all familiar. I've run nonprofits most of my life, and fundraising is just part of the job. So we were at this silent auction, and I said to my partner, "Look over there, there's this awful thing on the wall was before televisions were on walls. This is 23 years ago. But it was a piece of framed art that was so horrible. And then inside the frame moved toward me, came alive, and it was the scene that I described of the man on fire. And that's when it changed inside me. I knew I wasn't in my own psychobabble, my own dreamscape anymore. I knew I was being communicated to. I just knew it. So I wasn't quite awake yet, but I became alert. I did waken. I wrote down what I saw quickly and prayed to the man and said, I don't know who you are or what you need, but my name is Nathan and I'll help if I can. A few hours later in the morning on this retreat was a friend of mine who I had prayed with routinely, and I knew she was gifted and spiritually advanced, intelligent, and had good discernment skills. I just said, would you mind praying with me, because something odd happened in the night. I don't know what I'm to do. So we did go into prayer, and eventually she said, well, whoever he is, he really wants to talk with you. Would that be okay? Well, I knew that she had the facility to allow for what I call assisted speech. She could allow somebody to borrow her voice long enough to tell a story, get a message across. So it turned out to be this young man, Ray, and the first of the two Afterlife Interrupted books, they both look very much alike. But I understand you have those there today in the room where you're in. The story is told in detail in that book at the front.
In the 20-some years, Father, you've been doing this work, how many people would you say you've actually assisted with crossing over? And my second part of that question is, I understand that most of the souls that are brought to you by their guardian angels have died suddenly in trauma. And does that mean then that many of the souls on earth who die in accidents and trauma have difficulty transitioning, or there's just a smaller percentage?
Of those people who die sudden traumatic deaths, I think very few of them need the services of people like you and I.
Right.
But those who do, and we're certainly not the only way that the afterlife, not the only way that this happens. But I think I've done about 350 of these.
Okay.
Most of the time they're of individuals, although sometimes people are clustered in a group. The groups sometimes are because their deaths had a similarity.
Right.
They died of falls, or they died in collisions between trains and cars, or something like that, where they, for whatever reason, are sort of clustered.
Okay. I would imagine, okay, when you first started having these experiences and having your assistance with the prayer partners and whatnot, that I'm guessing you probably kept this process to yourself. Knowing that the tradition that you come from is probably not terribly supportive of this kind of work. And at what point did you decide, I know the initials after your name are OP, which stands for Order of Preachers. So it's your mission to tell others about the work that you do. So at what point did you decide that this was important to let others know, to write books, to do interviews? You're going to be doing a podcast in September. At what point did you realize this is what you had to do, knowing that you're probably going to get some pushback?
Well, I'm thinking of a saying of Jesus that kind of the point of hiding a thing is so that it can be revealed later.
Okay.
And so I was busy running. I was at Stanford University. I was the pastor of the Catholic community there. I went on to another job at UC Riverside in Southern California. I just kept good notes so that when I felt like it was time to go public with it, I'd have a good body of material to come back to. I wish I'd started doing that a little earlier, because the first couple of years, I don't think I did keep very good notes. But eventually I did start that practice.
Okay.
And then I just decided that I wanted to wait until I wasn't a pastor anymore, because pastoring is already complicated enough without adding this element to it. So that was really my own decision. I decided when I was 60, I think I finished being a pastor, and that's when I began speaking of it more publicly.
Okay. Now, I do know in the introduction to your second book, your your what you call your prior provincial, which is your Dominican superior, I guess, in the region that you operate within, wrote a beautiful endorsement in the introduction, where he says very briefly, "I know of few priests as dedicated as Father Nathan to serving as a medic at the battlefront. His faith in God, who was love, and in God's promise of eternal life, leads Nathan undaunted to bring healing to those whose wounds menaced them on their journey home," which I think is very beautiful. You know, it's you know, obviously when I first started talking about the work that I do with you, you know, I have obviously I was raised a Catholic, and I have a lot of Catholic family members, and there were a lot of eyebrows raised. Is this, is this the subtle work of the devil or something like that? And my response is, absolutely not. Number two, before every session that you begin, you have what you call a communion of saints, where you invite to come forth to assist with this process a whole range of saints that come together to make this happen. I know some of your favorites are Archangel Michael, certainly St. Thomas Aquinas, St. Thomas, St. Francis of Assisi, St. Paul, and certainly the Virgin Mary and others. And from my own experience, even from the first time that you did that, when I was your prayer partner, I just felt the whole energy in the room change. And there was a sense of protection, a sense of peace. And from within that envelope of peace, you begin requesting that the guardian angel of the soul who needs assistance come forth to speak to you in order to set the ground, to set the stage for what's about to occur. You may want to clarify just a little about how these, the souls and the guardian angels and the various saints, how do they speak to you and you listen and then you repeat what they say to the prayer partner? Or is it, I think I've heard you express before that you actually maintain a dual consciousness. There's you, Nathan, who's aware of everything that's going on, but yet there's this other consciousness that spontaneously, where your voice is used by them to speak directly to the prayer partner and you're not intervening. Is that a good explanation?
Yes, but it's always orderly. I'm not just suddenly beset by some stranger who takes over my voice. That's always guided by the Holy Spirit. I think of the Holy Spirit as like the womb, that God is enormous, we're small, we're inside of God always, and that we're just becoming more conscious of that. You've heard me say this before, Michael. I never encourage people to pick up hitchhikers on this earth or on any other plane. I believe that God has made everyone well in God's own image. Everyone is beautifully made, but not everyone is currently behaving like good company. It's not safe to be absolutely unguarded about people you share your car with or open the door to. So, and when people speak about the Catholic Church being against this kind of thing, that's almost always the underlying reason that sometimes the church, I don't use the phrase mother church very much, but some people do. And sometimes the church just wants to be protective of its members. And sometimes that can have some overreach, like never do this in any circumstance at all. But I believe I was invited to. I was asked to, and I said yes.
Okay. Can you been able to identify, after all the 350 souls that you've helped, sort of why do these souls get stuck, whereas the majority of souls who die from trauma, and I know you also deal with souls who die from suicide.
Yeah.
Why do some get stuck and others don't?
Well, we chose the second of these two books came out in late November, which of course was during the pandemic, and it hasn't really been properly launched because we couldn't be together. But if you see in the subtitle, the second book, we scratched out the word stuck, because as this work has progressed, it really became clear that some were stuck because they were in a frustrating trauma loop, or angry at themselves, or angry at somebody. Anger is one of the things that certainly can get a person stuck. Self-loathing, sense of being cheated, that they were entitled to a different end of their life than what they got, something that has kind of held them back and had them feeling stuck. But others I've found just died needing more than you deal with a lot of people in your hospice work who you help them get better and better prepared for the moment when they leave their body.
Right.
And the hospice process supports that. Well, the ones that I deal with and you've helped me deal with didn't have the benefit of that kind of preparation. They were abruptly out of body, sometimes murdered, and sometimes on the other end of it, as they leave the body, they just need more support. And I found that when you and I work together, or my other prayer partners, I feel like we're at the end of a healthcare continuum where this wounded soul has been getting different kinds of help along the way, and now they really don't need what this level provides anymore, and we could be sort of the discharge staff that helps them gather themselves up and move on to the next level.
Have the experiences altered the way that you perceive the afterlife, let's say now versus when you first started this work? You have a greater sense of, you talked about levels or realms, or there's a lot of people, you die and you either go to heaven or the other place, and that's sort of it. But is it a little more sophisticated than that?
Yes, but I think even when I was a child, I understood that I was being taught these things in the first grade, but I understood that they were attempts to describe a mystery. That heaven, hell, and purgatory, for example, there are three specific like countries you go to after you die. I understood even as a little child that was a way of describing things in an elementary school classroom, but they were more subtle than that too.
Right.
So as these experiences came along, it just kind of gave more richness or filled in some gaps for me, I guess.
Okay.
And as you know, we're not giving guided tours of the afterlife. I have seen this much. The universe is enormous. I have something to say, and I'm saying it, and you're listening. But it's also vast. That I'm not an expert on all of it. I just have one little corner of this universe work that I can speak about.
I know when you convene your communion of saints, and they certainly do assist in the work that you do, but I also sense from the different interviews I've heard and from your reading your books, that you've developed sort of a personal relationship with some of these saints like Francis of Assisi or St. Paul and Michael the Archangel. And so is there a relationship you have or interaction you have with them when you're not doing these special sessions?
Yes. I wish I could see all the people who are listening, but I'm sure that many of you have professions where you work alongside co-workers within a professional role, but then maybe you have lunch together, or at the break, or around the edges, you also develop personal relationships with people who you first met because of your shared occupation. So sometimes when we're doing this work, where we and the angels of the saints or other souls that passed earlier, we're on task because we have work to do. But then around the edges of the work, there might be something that's chattier, less formal, that just feels natural. It's the way persons interact with each other. And sometimes those have ended up being really funny or just interesting, because when you're sort of, I don't know, off the record, you can just ask about things. And with regard to the afterlife and mysteries and stuff, I don't treat this as though I don't pump people for information. I believe that we're supposed to live in mystery, but I can ask, I don't know if you'd want to answer this, but would you mind? I'd like to know. And the fact that I ask a question doesn't mean that I feel entitled to its answer. But so sometimes I've ended up with friends. Mary, Mother of Jesus, is certainly one. St. Paul of Tarsus is a great friend. St. Dominic. They're St. Rose of Lima. I have a great fondness for her. Michael the Archangel.
Let me throw you a curveball. Have you ever talked to Jesus?
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Can you, is it, you know, I don't think you see Jesus, but do you have a certain perception? Is it the perception that we tend to all have as this, you know, man with long hair and a robe and sandals, and you know, or is it something that's more universal?
Well, yes, the incarnation of Jesus of Nazareth was for a specific amount of time, for a human lifetime, and a short human lifetime at that. But Jesus the Christ, the universal Christ, uh, is he is that and much more. So I believe, for example, that I encounter Jesus the Christ in you and in Linda, your wife, and in a lot of other people that I share my life with. So the spirit of Jesus, the universal Christ, is more infused, diffused, but he can also be an individual that you speak to back and forth. And I've had both of those experiences.
So I don't know whether it's your story or I heard it somewhere else, that someone who had a near-death experience and they were really anxious to see Jesus. That was their, and they didn't see Jesus. And as they interacted with other high spirits on the other side, at one point the person said, "Well, I expected to see Jesus. Where's Jesus?"
Yeah.
And the response was, "Well, he's been here all along, and you just haven't noticed it, because Jesus appears through the face of others. And it's the others where Jesus begins to manifest. And that is really ultimately his message on earth to us, was that even as, you know, Mother Teresa used to say, I see Jesus in the face of every person that I help. And that seems to be the answer. Where is Jesus? Well, he's everywhere.
Yes, in all persons and all things. I think the story you're thinking of is in the second book. We call that man John the Baptist. He was a evangelical Southern Christian pastor of a very small rural church. And he died, actually was killed in the place where he used to baptize people in a river. And after in his early phase of his afterlife, that he asked that question, why haven't I seen Jesus yet?
Okay.
And then he had to be taught, well, you have been seeing him all along. But if you'd also like to see that version of him that you're thinking of, with the toga and the beard and the sandals,
Right.
we'll get you ready for that, is what he was told. And
Okay.
so he was still looking forward to that as an experience that would give him joy.
The first time I did a session with you as your prayer partner, it was a fellow who was involved in a car accident, and he was responsible for other people being killed, and he was dealing with guilt. But I think you, if I recall, you probably estimated this probably took place sometime in the 1940s. And I'm thinking, this poor guy, all these years, he's been having to deal with all of this. And I think you made it very clear that time as we perceive it on earth is very different than time that's perceived elsewhere. Either time is not experienced at all, or it's experienced very differently. So these souls have not necessarily been laboring a long time to get to the point where they meet you. Is that your understanding?
It is, and you asked me a question earlier, and that this could have been the answer I could have given. How has my thought process changed about all of this? One thing is, I think, and at least the Catholic Christian imagination, and maybe the popular imagination, people can look at how diverse the universe and the ecology of the earth is, and take it for granted that there's such specificity and difference all over the place. And then when we think of dying, we somehow collapse all of that into 1, 2, or 3 categories. That it's got to be this way or the other way. And sometimes they're informed by religious ideas. And I've just seen on this point about time, I early on thought that people wouldn't pay much attention to it. Early on, I used to ask people, do you remember what year you died? And a lot of them had trouble answering such a simple question. And many of them were American. So I hit upon the device of saying, can you remember who was the last president you can remember? And then that would kind of put me in the ballpark of what years we're talking about.
Okay.
But I did learn later that some people pay a lot of attention to time, and other people almost none at all. it just depends, varies by person.
The question I'm thinking of now is more of a question I was going to ask sort of at the end, but your mission and the work that you do and the books that you write, my question is, so what? You know, why should I care? Why should I care? Or the people listening to this care? Or why should people in general even care about all of this? What's other than the fact that it's fascinating and that we have some sense that that veil between the earth and the afterlife is thinner than we thought, what's the real benefit for us? What do we take away from it?
Well, it would depend. I was in a bookstore the other day, and a really great local bookstore here in Tucson. Big place, lots of aisles and departments and so on. And there were people all over it in different parts. It's quite clear when you walk into a bookstore that a lot of people will never care about that kind.
Mhm.
I'm probably not going to have a lot of interest in the bridal registry section over there, or the opera. There's plenty of things that I would not go anywhere near, and that my topic would be like that too. There's plenty of people that would not be interested in this topic, but for those who are, I think it's important to share what you have to say for the common good. What I try to do.
I mentioned earlier that for the most part, and it's been my experience working as your prayer partner, that individual guardian angels bring individual souls to you who have difficulty crossing. But I remember we did have one session where there were multiple people killed, and one person came forth by the guardian, but it was also representing others. And this was the situation that we were able to determine during this session occurred in Iraq.
Oh yeah.
Where there was a mosque and there were two different factions of Islam, and one faction decided that they were just going to go into this mosque and machine gun everybody that they had differences with, and that's what happened. And it was a very, very moving session. It gave me some really fascinating insights into, I think the fellow's name was Nadar, N-A-D-I.
Nadi, N-A-D-I.
Nadi. And his family was killed along with him. But what's interesting is, and this occurs with all of your sessions, is that by the time they get to you and they present their story, they have already been vetted by the angels and the other high folks on the other side who have been working with them. And so they often want to have somebody that they've been working with come forth to assist them in making their next step. Sometimes it's a friend, sometimes it's a relative. There have been, certainly certain situations that some fascinating individuals, both from the heavenly realms as well as historical figures, have come forth to help them do that. And in the case of the fellow in Iraq, he was very clear that all the people who were killed simultaneously with him, not all of them were ready to move on. So some of them still had work to do in the realm in which they existed. But what happens often is that not only does a person come forth to help them move forward, but they bring a means of transportation, and that transportation is sort of a metaphor for where they're going. In his case, it was a barge that was filled with his deceased relatives from prior years, and the barge was decorated with beautiful flags and religious symbols, and they were going to get on and go down this river, which probably could be construed to be a river of life. But it was a very beautiful ending and a very beautiful way to move to the next step.
Yeah, and you remember it was his father was on that barge too, and his father smiled at him, and he recognized his father.
Okay.
And he said, "I think that's what's happening for everyone here. Each of us is seeing the thing that it would be best for us to see, or the thing that it would most delight us or make us feel safest to get aboard and move along."
You have in your first book, the stories. I should indicate so everybody's clear. When Father has a session, he records it, So he has exactly the words that are being said by the angels and the souls and the prayer partners, and then he has it transcribed. So the stories in the book that you read are the actual transcriptions and the words of what everybody said.
Yes.
And I forgot my question or what's going to be on the tail end. Do you have any comment on that?
Well, yeah, I just use my iPhone, and I have an app on it that is just a recording and a transcription app. And so I typically have done this with you. Let me see here. I happen to be right next to the bed where I sleep, and this is my journal that I keep on the nightstand. I had a dream last night that still needs to be recorded. Didn't write that down, but I remember it well. But anyway, Michael, you know this because we've done it so frequently. We'll arrange to do a call. You live in Pennsylvania and I live in Arizona. We haven't met in person except that one time when we were together when we first met, although we hope to see each other soon.
Right.
When we go into a session, we start with our protective prayer, and I believe that I'm led in this process and that I'm to follow the Holy Spirit. I'm not to be the active agent so much as I am the guided participant. I ask the Holy Spirit, this is the Holy Spirit's work. I'm here to do my part. So we start with our protected prayer. Then I read the little account. They're not very long most of the time, the little dream story. Normally, I pause the recording because it costs $1.25 a minute. And if I'm going to have some period of stillness, I don't want to pay $1.25 just still. So I put the app off for a moment, sit still, go deeper. I'm sure there are a lot of meditators in this audience today. You all know how to quiet yourself and get deeper and deeper and be able to be a better hearer. And then I read it once again, kind of for mind and heart, the first time for the data and the second time for the emotions associated with it. And the prayer partner often has never heard of this story before. Isn't that the case with you? Usually you're hearing the story for the first time. So I want you to have a chance to let it kind of seep into you. And then I'll put the recording back on. And very often I'll say, we're here at the service of the person who's brought this dream story. I'm Nathan, this is Michael, or Michael and Linda. Linda's with us. And we're here and ready to help. I say, you're invited to borrow my voice if you'd like to. Most of the time we ask for a guardian to do what we call a mic test. These people have never done this before, and it's a moment of some anxiety, or at least it could be. And they've all been traumatized, although they've been vetted that they're ready to do this crossing. So we just calmly say, if there's a guardian angel who would like to facilitate and maybe give us a little clarity about how we can help today, you're welcome over here. I usually, I can feel the energy, and very often I can get a sense of the name of that angel. And very often they pick like a nickname. And then you like to play with them. Just for all of you who are listening, I have other prayer partners, but Michael is the most playful one. And even though this sounds like it's deadly serious work, Michael doesn't let it be that. He wants to tease or play with whoever comes through. And some of the transcriptions end up being really delightful because you bring that to them. So Michael will get a guardian angel laughing or engaging in some kind of sarcastic banter or something just because you sort of started it. Anyway, the guardians will come on the line only long enough to give a little bit of clarity. If I need some specific clarity, most of the time I know the gender of who I'm dealing with, but not always. If I feel it's important, if there is a storyline, the dream had 4 or 5 people in it, I might ask, are we helping all of them or just the kind of the narrator of the story? So sometimes we'll be given that. And then they'll often sort of beg off by saying, she's ready to speak for herself now, so I will slide to the side and I'll continue to pray for you. Doesn't that sound familiar, Michael?
Yep. you in your book, in your transcript, in the stories that you tell, you felt it was necessary from the very beginning to recontact these souls to get their permission to use their story in your books. Why is that?
I think it's the distinction that we might all be familiar with between something being personal and private. I wish I could see you all, but I wonder if you've ever publicly spoken of something that you shouldn't have. Have you ever thought that you were free to relate a story that someone else told you, only to find out that they were offended that you did so? You should have asked me before you told that story. The fact that something is told you doesn't mean you have the permission to repeat it. And these stories are all personal, but need they be private? And so my friend Laura, who has since died more than a year ago now, she got tired of me hearing talking that way and said, well, why don't you just ask them? They came to you once and spoke to you. You have a good reason. You're not just poking around the afterlife, disturbing people's peace. You have a simple question to ask. What if we just go into prayer and ask them?
Has
And so,
anyone ever said no?
yes, not absolute no. One person, in fact, was murdered, but the person who murdered her concealed that fact and made it look accidental. And now it's enough years have passed that her children are grown and there's grandchildren. She said, did they really need to live their lives knowing that I was murdered? Maybe I could change my name or change some circumstance where you could still use my story, but my heirs don't necessarily need to know the sordidness of that. That fact, two of them have done that in the two books. One in each of the two books have chosen to do that. Nobody has said that I couldn't use their story at all. In the new book, I have a story of a woman who committed suicide, and she didn't want any part of what she called religious shaming. That she felt like, okay, you're a priest. Are they going to make you say things about me or about suicide in general that suggest shame? And if so, I don't want to take part. I said, no, I don't feel the need to do that. And so she agreed to allow me to use her story.
When you assist people who committed suicide, is there a contrast between most people's perception? Most religions obviously say this is not a good thing to do, but is there, in your experience, how do they explain where they are now? Are they under great stress, or I think you used the term one time that many suicides that are not done out of complete free will. There's always these extenuating circumstances like drug abuse. And so is there more of a compassionate care of those by the team of people working with them, or how would you explain that?
Well, I did explain it, I think, well, in the second book, but one tricky part of it is I did not want to write anything that made suicide look attractive.
Right.
So I tried to be very intentional about that, and I think I succeeded at it.
Okay.
And I'm not speaking about everybody's everything. I'm only talking about the little population that came to me. So I'm only trying to pass on what I've experienced directly. Many of the people who would be attracted to a religious community like the one that's sponsoring this conversation, I should think, know about the power of now, the importance of the present moment.
Mhm.
Have anyone who meditates, contemplates, and doesn't do that very long before they really begin to appreciate the importance of now and the sacredness of the present moment. A lot of times, people that do end up taking their lives really got in a bind where their present moment just didn't have sufficient peace in it. They couldn't stand it any longer. But there's something very sacred about the present moment that skipping ahead to some idealized other time or place in general isn't a good idea. But the ones that I've dealt with that did take their lives, as you said, they very often, there's a continuum. Sometimes people take just enough of the drug that maybe that it'll do the deed and maybe it won't. Or sometimes people will drive very fast and dangerous and maybe get in an accident that takes their life. It's not just putting a gun to your head necessarily. There's a spectrum. But the ones that I've dealt with have all been respected and listened to. One of them in the new book, she was told by her helpers, well, we weren't in the circumstance that you were in. It's not our place to comment on it. But we are with you now, and we can help you here and now. That's what I'm used to, kind of here and now help.
In the almost 2 years we've been doing this work, and 46 people or so, I think at last count, that Linda and I have been involved with, understanding that I don't talk about a lot of the experiences simply because the individuals or even some of the helpers who've come through haven't given permission to talk about that. So it's been an incredible experience, and what I've learned, and some of the beautiful people that I've been able to communicate with. But people will say to me, well, what's been your best experience with Father Nathan? And I have no doubt whatsoever what it is. And I'll tell the story. I'm not giving away any names or anything, but it was a pretty, I don't want to say run of the mill session, but it was a fellow that, needed some help and came to you through the guardian angel, and then an assistant came at the end to help him move forward, and he's moving forward to another realm. And he stops and says, oh, over there in the distance, I see, well, maybe he called it a picture frame or a postcard or whatever, and there are all these people inside, and they're waving to you and Linda. And they are former hospice patients who died, who were expressing and had this opportunity to express their gratitude to you for what you've done.
Yes.
I was in tears. I mean, that has touched me more than anything else of the work that I've done with you.
I remember it clearly, and they weren't all the people that had died. Sometimes they were the loved ones who sat in the chair next to the deathbed.
Right.
People who had since passed, but there were people who were grateful to you and Linda. And they lined up the way that you might at the end of a retreat, on the steps of the building, and the short ones in the front and the tall ones in the back. They all kind of grouped so that they could get in a group shot and wave at you to thank you for the kindness that you showed them in your hospice work.
And it also obviously was very touching, but it's also a good indication of the fluidity between this world and the next world. That let me give you an example, another really beautiful story. Linda and I this afternoon, in fact, we didn't get here till about 15 minutes before this program started. We attended a memorial celebration for a good friend of ours who died a few months ago. And I was asked to speak to the group. And in speaking to the group, I said, based upon my our 20 some years of working with hospice patients, I've come to understand very clearly, and I trust explicitly, the reality that our loved ones are always very close to us. They're not in some outer realm on cloud nine playing a harp. They're very close to us. And particularly, and I quoted you, Father, in a podcast that I listened to yesterday, where someone asked you a question, and as part of your answer, you said, I think that loved ones are closest to us. Loved ones who have died are closest to us at family celebrations. Weddings, even funerals, baptisms, and certainly like the celebration we had today. And I said to the group, this is a beautiful celebration here. I said, Leslie is not out there in some realm just trying to listen in. Literally, trust me when I tell you that Leslie, there were about 100 people there. Leslie is amongst us. She not only hears and feels everything that you as an individual are saying and feeling, there's also this collective love that she feels that's bathing her. And it is just so incredibly beautiful. And I ask you to absolutely believe that that is the case. And to understand that in your own particular lives and dealing with loved ones who have died, that it's just your intention to have them with you there's generally all that's necessary for them to be there. And it's when you can have that kind of familiarity, I think it takes away some of the sting of the idea of losing somebody, thinking that you're not going to reunite with them again until you die. But they're with you all the time. And then there are people like Linda. When you want to wave,
Oh, she just walked in.
yeah, there's people.
Hi,
Hi, Linda.
everyone.
There's people like Linda who, I know, who have special abilities. As St. Paul says in one of his Corinthian letters, some people are given special gifts. Father Nathan was given a very special gift to do his work.
Very.
And in terms of, Linda, she has a special gift to sometimes see through the veil. It's like, I enjoy telling the story. Every time we go to a funeral service at a church or wherever, at some point during the funeral, Linda will elbow me and tell me where the deceased is and how they look. Do they look younger? They almost always look younger. Sometimes they're much larger than they were on earth, but she'll be able to point out where they are. And Linda also says that most people attend their own funeral, and a lot of people will go to the funeral home and they stand by the picture board that people have at the funeral home because they want to listen to what people are saying about them. And so
Be careful what you say.
yes,
That's right.
be careful what you say. And then so it's a beautiful example on how this fluidity that I talk about, that life is not so distant. And boy, when you deal with most of the people we deal now with hospice are people who are actively dying, who are expected to die within 48 hours. And so you're at a very critical point of their life. And
Sacred.
and the reason we wrote the book is that people need to understand. I'll be talking about this in great detail tomorrow, but the reality is that you can communicate with your loved one, even though that loved one you think is unconscious is actually just unresponsive, but at a subtle but profound level, they're very much aware of what's going on, and you can communicate with them and trust that they feel and hear you. And it can make such a big difference in terms of the closure that a loved one has, with their loved one who's dying. And it's just, and everybody at some point in their life will, if they haven't already, they will be at the bedside of an actively dying person. And how they react at that particular point, and the example that they show to others can make such a big difference in having a beautiful, beautiful transition for a soul. Anything to say?
Well, I think at the funerals, from now on, whenever he asks me if I hear anything, I don't answer him, because then he starts to nudge me, and then everybody in the church is looking at me. So I just ignore him now.
You've been ignoring him for a long time, haven't you?
Right. That's right.
Just 40 years.
Thank you for that very enlightening comment.
Aren't you glad you came?
What do you think? Maybe now is a good time, Father, to open it up for some, Q&A and see if
Sure.
any questions that not only to explain better the things that we've talked about, but maybe some other aspects of your work that you may or may not be involved in that people are curious about. So, Lakshmi, are you on the other end? Are you opening up, how are people going to ask their questions? Lakshmi, are
Hello
you?
down there.
There. Right here, he'll be able to see you. Yeah, there you go. See?
Okay, I'm changing seats
Oh,
now. and
let
our
me change my
camera
seat.
is Nearby.
Oh, you can get out of the way. Let me just get over
It's
here.
there.
Sorry.
This one? Yeah. This is Lakshmi here, waving.
I certainly did.
And so thank you for this very enlightening talk so far. Thank you for your candidness and for all the grace that you're showing us from the other side. And yes, questions. I believe you might have some questions that were sent in advance, but maybe we'll save a little time for that, or if you have something you want to start with, Michael, you can do that. And people here with us can also have a question, and people online, we could do that thing where they raise their hand. Do you want to do that?
Sure.
we can do a little, I'm not sure if you're all familiar with how to raise your hand. You have to click the participants button, and then there's a little raise your hand button in the bottom corner of the screen, and you can be called upon. You can also just unmute yourself and say, I'd like to ask a question, and we'll call your name and sort of line you up that way. So that's the technical part. I think I would like to start with a question to ask Father Castle. Since Michael here, so far you've been answering his questions. Is there any, like he just sort of ended with this, is there anything you'd like to say that hasn't been discussed yet?
Well, because we were just talking about funerals, some people don't want to go to their funeral because it's all just too fresh and painful. So not everybody shows up that way. The person, Michael, that you were talking about apparently passed a couple of months ago. And peacefully, I assume.
Right.
But you might have been with me in a case or two where people it was all just too awful. It was too fresh, too new, and they just didn't need to do that. They needed to stay away from it. And then people they're not always around, but they can learn how to be and how to do that appropriately without being a peeping Tom, without being a creep. And without like thwarting their own forward progress. Because there's a certain way, we've probably all done it somewhere in our life where we were maybe after a move or a change of a job or something, you so long for the life that you used to have that you don't pay enough attention to right now. And it begins to kind of be problematic after a while. So the present moment is just so important, but many of our loved ones can learn, and there's schools for these things. There are a lot of afterlife schools. If you say, I want to learn how to do that, you'll find you're not the only one. There's going to be other people that have the same interest that you do. And so you're shown the place where you can learn how, for example, to attend the funeral or to show up at Thanksgiving or whatever.
I would like to ask a question to follow up with that, and then we'll have another one here. And it's something that we've studied, as you said, this is spiritual school here. We've been studying some of this, especially through the Spiritism and through our yoga studies. And one thing that has come up in the past is that sort of karmatically, depending on the station that a person is in their afterlife, whether they have permission to come and visit their family. And whether or maybe it's sort of a permission to do that, or perhaps they've moved on so far that they're off into other realms and they really have lots of other work to do and may not, may be too busy, that kind of thing. So, or may not, and there's another thought on that is, the thing that's been said is that people can, there's different planes of existence, like what you had said before, there's planes, that somebody can go work with all the realms, up to where they are, but they can't go up higher, they can't go beyond that. So the higher souls who've been more involved, who've been out longer and learn more, can come down, but the others can't go up to meet them if they haven't been through that preparation process. Could you comment on any of that?
I could, and Michael or Linda, if you want to jump in, please do. One thing that I run into is a lot of times people now hear about me on a podcast, but they haven't read my books, and they jump to conclusions of their own. One of them that I try to dispel is the idea that the fact that a loved one shows up in your home or in the children's or the grandchildren's bedroom or something like that is not reason to believe that they're stuck. People will go, oh my God, she must be stuck because she shouldn't be here. She should be up in heaven. And instead she's, hanging around here. You got to help me. And they have a kind of a panicky feel that there's something out of order. That's just not always the case. Sometimes people just love you and they want to visit, and maybe they made you aware that they were with you, but it doesn't mean that they're stuck or upset or anything. My dad communicated with me the night between the wake and the funeral mass. Our family's custom is to do two services, an evening one and a mass and burial the following day. And between the two, he communicated with me, and eventually he said, for right now I'm here. I think soon I need to go somewhere for a while and I might be out of touch. That's the way he put it.
Yes, thank you for that answer, that personal experience. Did you have a question, Kika?
Yes, I do. Hello. Hello. You mentioned that you saw this person in his own funeral, and also that you saw all these people waving thanks to Michael. And that means that they are with their actual bodies. How do you perceive them? Do you perceive a body? Do you perceive a light? Do you perceive a current?
Linda, how would you answer that?
Me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're the one-
how do I see them? Well, they appear to me, and I'm sure to other people in different ways, but if I were in a funeral home, I might be sitting there and just thinking about what's going on and in the moment, and this it's a big presence. I just see this huge face. It just fills the room, this space, this light, and you know that that is them, and you can feel them saying, you know, that they love the people that are here, and to tell them that they're okay. The very simple messages.
I remember, just to highlight it a little bit, you may not be aware, Father, but years ago I used to do healing work at the ashram
right.
in Maryland, and using what's called crystal healing lights. And I was there one time, and
I wasn't.
Linda was home here in Pennsylvania, and the lady that I was working with was on the table, and I used my cell phone. It shut off, but I keep the vibrator on in case anybody calls, and I keep time on it. And I looked at it, and there was a text message from Linda to call her right away. So I went out to the parking lot and I called her and I said, "What's up?" And she said, "Well, I've been sitting in meditation and the Virgin Mary showed up and told me that you down there have this woman on the table who's going through tremendous stress, and you need to tell her that the stress that she's experiencing will be over very soon." So, you know, I'm used to this, so I don't even question it. I go back in, and when the session is done, I said to the lady, I said, "Hey, here's what happened. Believe it if you want." And she just broke down crying. She had a bracelet of the Madonna on her wrist, and said that the night before she has a statue of the Blessed Virgin on her nightstand, and she just held it to her heart, crying, begging for relief from this stress,
And asking for a sign.
and asking for a sign that it's going to happen. And there was the sign. So
And there's no difference with my being in Pennsylvania and Michael being down at the ashram. I mean, the message came through.
Well, and I think that often it's like the Holy Spirit somehow selected Father 20 some years ago
Right.
to be the conduit for the work that he does. But I think the Holy Spirit, St. Paul says, people have special gifts. And I think the Holy Spirit, makes determinations and puts feelers out to get people to use any particular talents or abilities they have to assist others. And some people have certain abilities and other people don't. And that's just how it works. But it's a beautiful. Let me put it this way. You said something, Father. Maybe you could probably repeat it better than I can. In fact, I wrote it down. You said, "There is a you who is larger than what you presently perceive. And this you is always swimming in a sea of love." To me, that means that we on earth, we understand our three-dimensional reality. There's certain limitations that we have, but yet we exist and we function within those limitations. And sometimes those limitations keep us thinking that, gee, we're terrible sinners, or self-loathing, or I wish I could be better, and yada, yada, yada. But in reality, there's a larger us, however you want to define it, that's greater than that, that is truly a reflection of the infinite unconditional love of God. And if we could, and often when you read the stories of the mystics and the various mystical saints, they talk about that and how they can plug into that and experience that, and how it is so beyond words. They can't even put it into words. It's just so fabulous. And how, as I know Thomas Merton wrote one time, if people could just see what radiant beams of light that they are, they would bow down at the feet of everybody that they meet. And so we are all we're made in the image and likeness of God. How could we not be these beacons of light, even though we're certain challenges we have in life that are given to us that don't allow us to perceive that. But if I take away from anything from this particular session this evening, is that we are magnificent souls, and we have a destiny that we can't begin to imagine that's going to go. It's an infinite destiny. It's an eternal destiny. That love will never stop. We will always be involved in some way to manifest that love of God. How that is, who knows? But it never ends.
Thank you. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to go take a bath now. Good night, everybody. Questions from your end?
Take a deep breath after that. Thank you, all of us.
You said you could take a deep breath.
Okay.
Introduce yourself. We have another question.
Hello, this is a question for Father Nathan. And when we have a loved one who has passed, in my case, my husband passed away when I was 23, and I have had pretty much a lifetime of much struggle with my son, who is now 41. And so many times I have asked him for guidance, and I haven't felt like I've received it. It's been such a bumpy road, and it was a very loving marriage. It ended too soon because he died a week before our second anniversary. But to this day, I feel so lost, and as if I'm losing hope about being able to have a good relationship. And at the same time, he's always been, and especially in the later years, very hostile toward me. And he made a certain improvement recently when he did 2 ayahuasca ceremonies, where he said he saw God, and it seemed like I finally had a little bit of hope that he was softening up. But then lately everything has gone haywire again, and he says he can't deal with me until I have had an ayahuasca ceremony. I'm a practicing Catholic. I heard that we're not supposed to do it. I really don't know what to do or how to deal with anything anymore. The older I get, and yesterday was my birthday, and I feel like the older I get, I have more questions, no answers. So I welcome any guidance you can give me. Thank you.
What's your first name?
Grace.
Grace, that's a lovely name. If I can help you offline, all you need to do is email me or go to my website and use the little email icon. Well, your son is making a big assumption that there's only one possible way that you could possibly meet his criteria. You have to replicate the exact experience that he had in order for you and he to be on the same page. I would push back against that a little bit. And I don't know about the ceremony that you're talking about, and if it's something that you might consider doing, even though you're a Catholic. I don't know. I'd be happy to learn more about it offline and maybe give you another way or two of thinking about the circumstance that you're in. In the end, there really is only one life to the customer. Each of us has to find our peace with our own way of being, as much as you might like for your son to be different than he is or to behave differently toward you than he does. I just think in part we have to just make our peace with our own self and the way that, and try to be our best self to others, and sometimes the others come around to the way we'd like them to be, and other times they don't. But I'd be happy, Grace, to talk with you offline if you'd like to do that.
Thank you very much. And would I be able to ask a follow-up question? Mostly what I'm interested in is in being able to figure out what to do with what's going forward in my life. I am totally lost. And that's why I thought, not only in the past, but it's like, okay, if there were a message that I could get from my husband or even my parents who have passed, and I've always been the person who takes care of the others, and it just seems as if now that I'm on my own, I don't know what to do, and that's, I feel very lost. I don't know if that's something that, when I read, I just heard about this presentation yesterday, and I thought, okay, I read about the people who have passed who are stuck and the people who are here that are stuck. And I have the feeling that the people who have passed in my life aren't stuck, but I definitely am, so thank you.
Now, again, if I can help you, I will.
Here's, if you can see that, here's Father's website, nathan-castle.com.
Thank you.
And there's our website, thejourneyhome.net.
Okay, we can see that well, thank you.
Grace, one thing that I don't do is kind of mediumship, providing messages between deceased ones and people here. I don't believe that that's my calling. So I wouldn't be the right person for that if that's what you're seeking.
My idea isn't basically that. It's more like the way to be able to, because I understand that the Catholic Church also does not want us to be going to psychics and mediums and things like that. I feel as if I want to be able to connect with what's God's will for my life. Because I got very sick in 2014, he kept me alive, but I feel like I've been like aimlessly wandering since then, and he must have kept me alive for something. So that's where either through I pray a lot every day, and I just think that there's something that I have to do. I just don't know how to get to that, and I don't want to hog the time here. So, but thank you, and I will contact you, Father.
Sure. I'm beginning to do more online counseling, and one of the distinctions I make is I think I'm a good change agent. I can help. I can offer people alternatives that they might not have thought about, but I'm not good for commiserating. If misery loves company, I'm not a good companion. I just don't have the patience. But there's probably somebody, if that's what you needed, there's probably another shoulder to cry on. But I think I'm going to be pretty good at saying, if you're ready to try to change, I think I can probably think of a few possibilities that we could explore together.
I'm more than ready. Thank you.
All right, then be in touch.
Thank you.
By the way, happy birthday.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
We have one more question here, and then if there's anyone online, you could actually just raise your hand, we should see you, or unmute yourself and let us know if you have a question.
And Mother, could you speak a bit about when we see loved ones in dreams, how we kind of know if it's our own stuff that's going on or if it is them themselves? Some dreams, of course, have an unmistakable quality and you know, but sometimes it's not so easy to tell. So if you have any comments about that, thank you.
I do. Was trained to first experience a thing, whatever the thing is, and after you've experienced it, then reflect upon it, discern the truth of that thing. And where these spiritual experiences and dream experiences enter in, I'm exactly with you that there are some times when you have a dream that involves the presence of a deceased loved one, and there's just no doubt in your mind all the way through that was a visit. It just has a clarity that doesn't really need any further delving into. Other times it might not be nearly that clear. And then, do you believe that you have a center of truth in you? Is there a way that you can sit still and ask inside you, is this true?
Sometimes with certain subjects and people, I guess I will get more specific, which is I've had a couple of loved ones where sometimes I see them and they're happy, they're at peace, or they're all right. And then other times when they're in distress, and I'm like, is it my memory of like, living through trauma with them that's coming out? Or are they really in such a situation? And in those cases, I'm not quite sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's good to be able to say that too. Right now you have invited 3 experts to be with you, and it sounds like we know all kind of stuff about everything because we're the experts. Well, there's a limit to that. We're still dealing in mystery all the time. One thing that saddens me is when people do have a dream and someone in it is distressed, they sometimes leap to the conclusion that, oh no, mother must be in trouble in the afterlife. And then they get all worried about it and feel like they need to be this person that somehow is the afterlife rescuer of a loved one. And to me, that's just not helpful. It's just upsetting, and it might not even be true. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay. So just basically lean on discernment and prayer and just.
Yeah, and then if you have, you apparently live in a spiritual community. Is there someone there you can speak with, bounce ideas off of, ask for wisdom?
No, not at this point. But that's okay. I appreciate what.
Look around. You're not very far away from somebody who might be your new friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions here? Comments? Questions or comments? Did you want to say something?
I had a brother who got in. And my brother took his life, and I've just had one experience with him. Well, we had several experiences with him within the first month or two, which almost showed us that we would be reunited with him in the afterlife afterwards. And then he was younger and he was full of energy. And since then, I've had a dream, but I don't understand the teachings of the church about suicide. It's almost like they're held in a different place. Although I was given a message that from my mother that they were all together at the same place. And I just wanted you to clarify that a bit.
You talking about the teaching of the Catholic Church?
I think, I'm Protestant, but I mean of the Christian Church about it.
Well, I believe that God is love, and that Jesus is the embodiment of that love, and I believe that loving hearts go out in a large way to people who are brokenhearted, and what I've seen is of people that took their lives, the ones that I've been involved with, they've gotten the help they needed. They were surrounded. One of the things, oftentimes people that take their lives were beset with mental illness of one kind or another.
Well, this case, it was bipolar.
Yes, and it can be very frustrating because the drugs that are meant to help, sometimes you have to wait 2 weeks to see whether they're effective or not. There's sort of there can be kind of a hit or miss quality about it, and the drug that worked well for one person doesn't work well in the body of another, so on. One of the things I've seen in the afterlife is that there's a therapeutic continuum that has everything that people need, but there's no guesswork. The Holy Spirit knows exactly what people need, and they're not getting misdiagnosed, and they're not being over medicated. Have you guys, Michael and Linda, you're both smiling. Do you have some experience of that yourself?
Well,
When I taught in psych rehab, I would hear a lot of the participants would talk about, oh, they're starting a new drug, and so they're whatever they were that day, and they were all over the place. And I'm listening to you and I'm thinking, how nice what you just said about when you're on the other side. There isn't that kind of guesswork.
And your insurance doesn't get in the middle of it and decide what you can have and what you can't have and how many days you can be there and all that stuff. I don't mean to make light of it because I work alongside plenty of people in mental health. It's just that the delivery systems for it leave a lot to be desired. Even for people that make a career of it, can tell you, can be really frustrating that they don't get to do their healing work quite the way they wish they could. And I've seen plenty of people who are getting very good afterlife care and who are moving well through what they need.
Thank you.
and that's, and just at the tail end of that question, it's when we've read about thousands of near-death experiences, and almost to a person, they do talk about how they are welcomed into a beautiful place, unconditional love. Often, one person described seeing Jesus and was like being wrapped in a warm blanket of cashmere. It was just the most loving experience they ever had. But what's also really important is the lack of judgment. And so many, Linda and I wrote another book before the one that I mentioned before. It has to do with near-death experiences, and it was a way to let hospice patients know that as they approach death, that there is no need to have fear, that they will be welcomed into a realm where the fear is not necessary. It's good if they need to forgive anybody on this side of the veil, that they do it. They'll be welcomed with absolutely unconditional love and no judgment. Now, most people report they go through what they call a life review. So they will very quickly be able to see everything that they did in this lifetime, both good and bad. And those things that they did good, they'll have a feeling for how they affected somebody. At the same time, if they did things that weren't so great, they could feel the actual pain that they caused. And so it's Father talks about, that realm as being, there's no guesswork. The healers, the helpers know exactly what to do, but getting past that point of judgment. And I only say that because on this side of the veil, we hear about people committing suicide, and we sort of whisper it to other people. And if we have a religious background that says that these people are going to be in big trouble wherever they go, that's still fairly prevalent. If any message that I can convey based upon what I understand in my work is that's just not the case. That you said, Father, that God is nothing but love, and that love is so far beyond any of the parochial definitions that we often have. It's just unconditional, undescribable love, and that's just so important to keep in mind.
Thank you, Michael. We have another comment?
I don't have a question, but it's a comment, and it's really sweet and special. Every time I see a shiny penny, it reminds it's my mom, and I don't know, I equate the shiny penny with my mother. And I had a loved one, a dear boyfriend that died before his 35th birthday, and when I think of him, I see a dime, a shiny. I'll be walking down the street and it just appears, and I know they're in heaven thinking about me, and it's really special. It makes me really happy when I see a shiny penny that I equate with my mom, and a dime that I equate with my ex-boyfriend that passed. So, and I know they're happy. I can tell, and they show me signs through coins.
I had one angel friend who told me that they particularly like American coins because of the saying that's on them. You know the one?
Which is, in God we trust.
In God we trust.
May I go back to the the issue of suicide, because of course we all want to know that our loved ones who have died that way are okay and they're met without judgment or anything. I had kind of the opposite situation because I have a friend, we've been friends for 20 years, and I have a very close relative who both within the last year or a few months have been saying, suicide looks really pretty good. And what I've been hearing is that when you get to the other side, there's no judgment. And I have some of the studies that we've done in the ashram, Spiritism, for example, they counsel that they give up the afterlife. It's not like judgment or hell at all, but it's the internal suffering that the people undergo is terrible. Like they're in terrible agony about it. So in the past, I've kind of leaned on that, like, don't do that, you know. But I just would like to hear what you would have to say, Father Nathan, about this argument. I mean, they're in a lot of pain, and their focus is not on how it would hurt the people that they left behind. They just want to go.
Well, I would encourage you to read my second book. Actually, it's best if you read them in order, because I try to introduce myself in the first one and give a overarching, larger story arc to the whole thing. And if you recall, when we were speaking about it earlier, I said I was very careful not to make suicide look attractive in the way that I wrote that material. One of the things that does come up, there might not be an external judgment from a judging God, but what I've seen is the importance of truth. And that if the one who's being assisted after their death, whether it was suicide or not, begins to get stubborn or to move in a way that isn't true, they're called on it. The way a good therapist calls you on it when you start going away from what's true and helpful. And they say, if you continue to go that direction, you will be able to help you less, or it will take you longer because you're avoiding a truth. And we can't help you if you move away from truth. And one thing that persons that do take their lives eventually at some point have to reckon with is the pain that they caused other people at their passing. But they don't have their nose rubbed in that right away. But they do kind of, you might call that karmic, but they do create some added agenda, some things that need to be worked through as a consequence of that choice. But it's all done in love. Nobody's relishing you being punished or adding to your suffering.
And yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's what you just said about the truth is a wonderful point to finish on. It's actually the perfect time. It's when we had intended to close at almost 8:30, and it seems to be the crux of the teaching, in a sense, of the message that you're giving, not in your work with the souls, but for those of us who are still here and doing the spiritual work and wanting to know, have these questions that answer sort of cuts through all of it, or shines a light on it, which I think is really important. So now I'm interested in reading your two books all the way through, and maybe some others are here as well, and we're really, really grateful.
Well, I've found that sometimes these kind of things create more questions that come up later. And if you'd like to have me as a guest again or have me in person, just be in touch.
Wonderful. Wow. That's a wonderful offer. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, let me finish with on a high note, okay, to tell a little story that's in Father's first book. You want to hear a little story?
I was just going to ask you for your final words. Go for it.
Father says, I was in the seminary, and one day, it was a nice day, I went outside, beautiful sun, I'm sitting on a bench, and this young lady from the town walks by, and she says, oh, are you in that seminary there? And Father says, he's not a father yet, he's just a seminarian. And he says, yes, I'm a seminarian. And the girl says to him, oh, that means you're sterile. And I read, and that was one of those laugh out moments of reading in the book. She meant obviously celibate, but she said, oh, you're sterile. How did you respond to her?
I said, I think I'd need a sperm count to. No, I didn't say that. I just said, I think you mean celibate. No, I'm not sterile, not to my knowledge. I'm not
That
just
story. Okay, I'm done.
Good way to end, Mike.
I'll be, by the way, if anybody's listening, we will be back same time and station tomorrow at 7 o'clock Eastern time, and we'll go into more of our work with assisting the actively dying. So stay tuned.
God bless you all, and thank you for having us.
Thank you, Father.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Om Shanti.